just
Coming and going, apparently. He's in and out.
Like a spirit?
Yeah.
Or like that?
well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6 o'clock p.m. Welcome to our committee of the whole meeting for Tuesday, April the 2nd. I'd like to welcome our staff and our guests in attendance today, either in person or virtually, as well as those who view these proceedings at a later date. I'm Councillor Richard Novak, and I'm joined today by my colleagues from my far left, Mayor McNeil Smith, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul, and on my right, Councillor Duncan and Councillor Garnett. And we have Councillor Duck joining us remotely with audio only, I understand. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're privileged to live, work, and play on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Wisanic Nations, whose stewardship of these lands and waters from time immemorial have allowed us to flourish here today. I'd like to get a motion to approve the agenda as circulated. Mayor Neil Smith.
Second.
Seconded. Any discussion, corrections, additions? None. We'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. And now we're going to go to the public participation period for today. Public participation is for members of the public to speak to any of the items on the agenda. Today, public participation is limited to those agenda items which do not have a dedicated presentation component, and there's only one agenda item which fits this criteria, and that is item 7A. Speakers are asked to limit their comments to 4 minutes. So I will ask for the first time if there's anybody who wishes to speak. I'll ask for a second time if there's any member of the community that wishes to speak. And a third time. Seeing none, we'll close the public participation period and move to agenda item 5, which is approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Can I have a motion to approve
So moved.
those minutes? Councillor Rintoul, seconded.
Second.
Councillor Garnett, thank you. Any additions, deletions, changes? None. We'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None. Thank you. Carried. The minutes are approved. We have no presentations for item number 6. And item 7, we have a development variance permit application number DV100353 for 10222 and 10224 Resthaven to reduce minimum setback for heat pumps in order to allow 2 new heat pumps at a 2-family dwelling. I understand we have an application from, a presentation from the applicants, Monica Postel-Hasson and Ralph Goad. Welcome, if you'd like to come up. And just press the button on the mic.
Hi.
Great.
It's not
Thank you.
really a presentation because we don't have anything to show, but clearly you have our letters of justification as to why we would like to have our setbacks as we've stated. And it's basically because there is no other feasible space to put those units around our properties due to the fact that we have patio doors and gas lines, and the duplex is fairly large on its lot and didn't leave much either side. So we both want to put in a heat pump in our respective properties, and so we need this permit to do so.
Yes, I basically have nothing further to add. The bylaw has put us in a situation where there's no realistic nor legal spot to put an outside unit on our lots, and hence we're asking for the setback, which I think is laid out in the documents that we've already presented.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Thank you. We'll now turn to the public participation period for this development permit application. You folks can sit down if you like. Is there anybody from the public, I'll ask for the first time, who wishes to speak to this agenda item? Seeing none, I'll ask for a second time and a third time. So there's no public commentary on this application. We'll now give the committee some time to ask questions, if there are any, either to staff or to the applicants, if they're willing to take questions. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, I'm just confirming, the applicants are the owner builders, so you're living in the units that are being constructed?
No, the units are
But they're
5
already-
years old.
Oh,
We are
okay.
both individual owners of either side.
Thank you.
And,
That clarifies it.
We have baseboards currently, which I've never had before and do not like, and would like to be more efficient and environmentally friendly. When I started the project, spoke to my neighbour who also started to look into it as well. So
Okay.
that's why we're kind of joint at doing it. But no, the buildings are 5
The
years
buildings
old,
are-
and they're already there, and we can't really move them or anything.
That's great. Thank you.
yes, we just simply happen to be the two owners of the whole building, co-owners of each side of the building, and agree on the same wishes.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, I'll ask someone to read in the recommendation. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, that's 246 feet of 10222 and 10224 Resthaven Drive, be notified regarding development variance application number DV 100353 to reduce the required minimum interior side setback in order to allow 2 heat pumps, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Seconder.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Any discussion, questions? Go ahead, Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Unfortunately, I went by the site, your homes, just to take a look, and I was somewhat surprised that they're quite new, and I'm surprised that the developer and the builder didn't put heat pumps in. And unfortunately, the burden falls to you. It would have been preferable, I think, if the developer had come to us for this in previously, so you wouldn't have to go through the process. The only other thing I would say is that, and I appreciate that, I believe it's 10216 that is neighbor of 10222 that was spoken to, and they were approval of it, and they were fine with it. And you can see that because the house is up forward, and where you're going to put the heat pump, it's not even by the house, and I believe that wall is a blank wall anyways. And on the other side, 224 next to 230 is kind of a little different in that there is a hedge and a shed that does provide some kind of a sound barrier, but that's where the entrance to their home is, which is really weird the way that place is set up. But so I would just say this is going to be mailed out. There'll be a mail out if we approve this, and I would just recommend that if you do have contact with those neighbors, it would be helpful for us if they were to provide some kind of email or a written correspondence. It just makes it easier and more seamless. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'll just concur with Councillor Garnett's suggestion. Certainly, looking at the overhead 10230 Resthaven, the proximity there, I recognize the recommendation. Looks to receive feedback and comment from the area, and hopefully we'll hear from the residents of that property. But if you have the opportunity to engage with them, as was suggested, I think it would be beneficial. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion on the question? We'll call for the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Sorry? I'm sorry, Councillor Duck?
I'm just approving.
Oh, okay. You didn't have a question? Okay. Thank you.
No.
The motion carries. Thank you very much. And we can move on to agenda item 8. We have a staff report regarding a sponsorship policy policy number AD022. And I will ask Ms. Judson.
Thank you very much.
Present. Thank you.
So this policy was drafted in response to a request from council made last fall. The town doesn't currently have a sponsorship policy, and 2 sponsorship initiatives that were underway at that time raised concern about the over-commercialization of public spaces. Given that context, this draft policy focuses on when a sponsorship opportunity should come forward to council for consideration and approval. The policy was developed by reviewing other municipal sponsorship policies in BC and Canada, and also by speaking with event organizers and community groups affiliated with the town of Sydney. So this included the museum, aquarium, current organizers of the Sydney Street Market, and Peninsula Celebrations. Through these conversations, we learned that sponsorships are a critical part of event delivery in Sydney. For example, while the town makes annual contributions to Peninsula Celebrations, sponsorship revenue from businesses far exceeds our contributions. Without sponsorships, many community events such as Summer Sounds concert series would not be viable, or they would need to charge an entry fee. Sponsorships can be found around the community, including in the name of our aquarium, some museum exhibits, and our annual parades. For years, business names were included on our downtown banners. Business names can also be found in the bricks in Eastview Park that recognize contributions to the construction of Bevan Fishing Pier. This draft policy aims to create consistency around sponsorships in Sydney so organizations know what is permitted in advance, and we can do our best to ensure people don't feel bombarded by advertising in public spaces. The policy is also designed to ensure Sydney continues to be an ideal place for annual events and community organizations, which play a critical role in making Sydney a great place to live and visit. We don't want to create unnecessary barriers for organizations doing good things in our community. With that in mind, these are the main criteria in the draft policy for when a sponsorship opportunity should come to council for consideration and possible approval. So any sponsorship which involves a sponsorship presence of over 6 months, and title sponsorships. So just to be clear, a title sponsorship occurs when the name of an event or facility is changed to include a business name. So the Sydney Street Market could be presented by a sponsor. That would be Sydney Street Market brought to you by the business name. That wouldn't come to council. But if they sought to actually change the name of the Sydney Street Market, as we saw last year, that would come to council. And to be clear, there are also times where this would not be required, even with a title sponsorship. So if an event happens just once per year, these events tend to be very dependent on sponsorships. Those would not come to council. So something like the Thrifty Foods Sydney Sparkles Parade, or events that aren't affiliated with the town of Sydney and simply occur through a parks use permit, such as the Seaside Magazine Charity Road Hockey Tournament. To be fair, those events which involve a park use permit tend to occur just once a year, so they would already be covered by that first piece that I shared. The policy also wouldn't apply to sponsorship agreements that are already in place. There are only a few of these, and they're listed under the legacy sponsorship section of the policy, but if those agreements end, the normal policy would apply. We think this policy strikes a good balance for our community. The community organizations and event organizers I've consulted have been able to review it. They haven't raised any concerns with it. I got positive feedback on it. At the same time, a policy like this would have prevented the instances that raised concern with council last year. And thanks for considering this. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Judson. I think we'll start with a round of questions before we get the motion on the floor. Any questions, Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, thank you. It seems fairly comprehensive. I maybe struggled with the policy myself, just trying to follow it through, and so I'm pleased we have the opportunity to verify some of this. I want to make sure that it's clear for future users of this. And I, in part, because if I look at legacy sponsorships, as an example, could you speak to the rationale in terms of why, for example, the Mary Winspear Center isn't included on the list, and if you could speak to whether or not they were consulted at all with respect to their future, providing input in terms of their future interest with respect to sponsorships.
They're not on the list, but if they did, anything happening within their space wouldn't fall within the policy. Like, they weren't consulted. Artsy also wasn't consulted, just because I didn't have time to arrange meetings with every community organization we're affiliated with, but the policy would still apply. For instance, if the Mary Winspear Center wanted to change its name to Business Mary Winspear Center, that would come here. Or if they were organizing an event that was outside of their sphere, like not within the building, that would come forward to council if it was a title sponsorship. But the work that happens within the Mary Winspear Center, the same with the aquarium or the museum, they do have the discretion to do as they wish within their institutions.
Okay, and so if I may, Chair, then the Shaw Center for the Sailor Sea is listed as a legacy within your legacy sponsorship list on the basis that the town owns that property, that building. Is that correct?
You're speaking of the aquarium?
Yeah, I just want to compare it to the Mary Winspear Center, because I want to see what the rationale is for one being listed as legacy and the other not.
Okay, well, Andrew just clarified that the Mary Winspear Center, we don't own the building or the land that it sits on.
Exactly
And so
my
that
question.
is-
So in the case of the Shaw Ocean Discovery Center, its former name I recognize, but because we own the building and they are a tenant essentially in that sense, this policy applies.
Yes, the policy does note that if it's within a town leased
Okay.
building, but also if we have an agreement in place, an operating agreement in place.
If we have a funding agreement in place, sorry?
No, it's,
Lease?
thank you. One moment, I just wanna, it says town-owned facility or on town property under lease or operating agreement. Thank you, sorry, that was a good question. I just don't know that much about the Mary Winspear Center land.
Again, if I may, finally, did staff, I know you mentioned you didn't have an appointment directly with anyone at the Mary Winspear Center. Did we have inquiries from them about this when the agenda came out, either through yourself or Mr. Hissick?
No, we haven't heard any feedback since the agenda came out.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair. And just to follow a little bit from Councillor Rintoul, so understanding then that if the Shaw Center for the Sailor Sea wished to change the name, that would come forward to council. But if the Mary Winspear Center chose to change its name, it would not come before council.
Yes, within this policy, we wouldn't, I'm so sorry, I misspoke before because I misunderstood who owns the building and the land of the Mary Winspear Center, but it wouldn't be within our jurisdiction to dictate the name of a building or facility that isn't on our land.
Exactly, and that's the rationale, is that we don't have any ownership in the land or the buildings, or apart from our grant, that doesn't qualify it. So, thank you.
Councillor Gurnett?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. Well, as I read it, for me, it's because these organizations, before we apply this new policy, already have sponsorship. So that, in my mind, that's why they're legacy sponsorships. That's how I read it. Am I wrong in that, or?
Yes, they're in the legacy section because they're existing sponsorship agreements.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I'm questioning through the chair to staff. When we were looking at other policies from other places like this, did any of them provide any kind of guidance in terms of what would be appropriate? So in the policy we talk about, it'd be up to council to decide for example, what level of commercial sponsorship would be appropriate. You know, I'm also thinking of, maybe it wouldn't be a commercial sponsorship, maybe it would be another organization, nonprofit, that has their label attached or wants to do something within the town. And so whether there's any guidance in terms of alignment with towns' values, so that whether that would be something that council could consider. If there's a sponsor that council deems to be maybe not in alignment with our values, say with climate change initiatives or other things, whether we would have the flexibility or whether other organizations consider that sort of thing.
I'm just thinking about the different pieces of your question there. So
Okay.
the first part where you talked about, are there examples in terms of how much is appropriate? And there are communities where it's broken down to some extent, like the city of Victoria, in terms of whether there are, you know, whether it's appropriate to have a large banner, whether it would be appearing on handouts. So it could be more prescriptive in terms of how much. What I saw when I was reviewing other sponsorship policies is that they tend to, in other communities, be designed more to promote this as a tool for revenue generation, and that's partly because there are other municipalities that are managing skating rinks and public transit, where people are very used to seeing advertising, and so it's looking at maximizing these opportunities. In terms of reviewing whether or not a sponsorship is appropriate, I think that it is fair that the values, I have definitely seen wording about council having the discretion to consider whether this sponsor's values align. What is in there is whether there would be, you know, any harm to our reputation, but it sounds to me like you're looking at something that is less clear. Like, it's not simply if it was an alcohol company, you're thinking even if it's a company that would perhaps like a car company or something that maybe could link to climate change or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what you have in mind, but are you looking for wording that's just a little more gray there?
Yeah, a little, just to give, to have that in the policy, not to specifically say what sort of companies,
Of course,
but
yeah.
just some sort of wording about, that would allow council to consider our, you know, values and how they're aligned.
Yes, I mean, we mentioned, as I said, something that would compromise the reputation of the town, but you're looking at something that wouldn't necessarily compromise a reputation, but that's less than ideal. Like something that you said just isn't as good of a fit with our values as potentially a different sponsor.
Yeah, I think maybe that's, yeah. Something along those lines.
Sorry, go ahead, Mr.
Thank you,
Rumble.
through the chair. Yeah, I think that's I mean, my read of the policy, the draft policy on page 3, at number 2, under restrictions, reads, sponsorships within the scope of this policy may not be accepted from companies or organizations that will compromise the reputation of the town's public image, including companies whose sponsorship could be perceived as influencing town and council decisions, etc. So I think it's very difficult, and I understand what Councillor O'Keefe is suggesting, but we're talking about, you know, some pretty subtle nuances in terms of what may be deemed acceptable, and I think it would be challenging to incorporate that specificity into a policy. I think where you'd get staff comment on what might be impacting in terms of reputation, we would look at that when we bring forward a staff report with a proposal that would be before council. As I said, I think it would be challenging to provide specific examples in a policy, because I think you end up potentially by being that specific, maybe tying council's hands in the future with respect to potential sponsorships that may be deemed acceptable. So I would, I would just be cautious if council's considering sort of more detail than currently what's in the policy.
Yeah, just to clarify, I wasn't looking for specific examples. I was looking for a more general comment about alignment with our general values, but perhaps, you know, it's kind of incorporated in what's there. And I think, yeah, that's it for me. Oh, actually, sorry, I did have one other thing. In terms of the, say, the revenue from sponsorships. So, for example, with the market, so it sounds like they could still go out and have a company contribute to that, and so they're not necessarily have a banner there to say this is the such and such market, but they are listed and they get the profile of being associated with the Sydney market, which is a good thing to be associated with. So in terms of the revenue for that, how is that, does the town benefit from that? And how is the amount for that negotiated, and how do we benefit from that?
Just to be clear, they could still have banners. It's just that the name of the market couldn't change. And so we saw the name of the market change last year, but there could still be banners that say Sydney Street Market brought to you by a company. In terms of what they do with that revenue, it isn't, no one needs to share that with us in terms of how much money are they making, what is the money being used for. And so there isn't something currently in our contract with the market operator that says if you have a sponsor, you need to disclose how much that is, the money needs to go towards this or that. It is part of their own decision as a business to, if they find it makes the market more viable, then that's an opportunity. We can just put limits on how far that sponsorship goes. And when I spoke with the organizers, the current organizers, their interest seemed to be on having rotating sponsors. And I don't know what they'll choose to do. They could have one sponsor throughout the summer, but they were interested in having different themes. So there could be a market that's themed for Pride, and perhaps a business wanted to be associated with that market, and that sponsor could have a tent where they're offering things and having, you know, some opportunity to engage with people in relation to that special week. But I'm not sure what they'll find is the best model for them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other first-time speakers? I have a quick question for you. With regard to council approval, it's clear that the policy states that council approval is required for long-term sponsorship, which I think is anything over 6 months, if I'm not mistaken, and a sponsorship involving a title sponsorship. That's great. Was there any thought given to adding a bullet point there for a substantial amount of money? And I know it's hard to pick a jumping off point, but for the sake of discussion, let's just say $10,000. It's a fairly large sum of money. It might not involve a title sponsorship. It might not be a long-term. However, for something of that substance, was there any thought as to whether or not something like that should come before council?
I think where we would see that coming in is if the town were pursuing sponsorships for something that we were leading. So say we wanted to create bike lockers, and like Squamish, we wanted to have sponsored bike lockers. Then I could see council setting a limit for staff are able to arrange sponsorships on their own at this level, and above that level, any sponsorship opportunity has to come to council. I could see other opportunities. I don't imagine we would have a sponsor for something like Town Talk, but if we're doing a Parks and Trails guide and we wanted to continue doing more print runs, maybe something like that. it's not something we're looking at this time. It didn't seem to be what was prompting council to have this policy created. But something like that, if we ever wanted to have a sponsor for future print runs, we could look at, okay, what's a number where staff should always come to council and make sure that's been considered. When it comes to sponsorships that are outside of, that aren't being led by council, they're very private. So in speaking about sponsors, no one revealed at any time the number that they're receiving. The closest I came was Peninsula Celebrations, just making the point that they receive more from corporate sponsors for the 2 parades and Summer Sounds concerts alone than they do from the town of Sydney each year. So they could give me a sense of not lower than this number, but that is private to organizations. So I don't think we'll ever know some of those things, and I'm not sure if that is critical.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think the examples you selected would probably fall under the existing rubric of long-term sponsorships, because typically people wouldn't spend that kind of money on a one-time deal. But I just thought that, you know, that additional bullet point might cover all bases. But I'm happy to see it as it is. Any other questions? Mayor McNeil-Smith, second time.
Thank you, Chair. A question through yourself, and I'm just thinking about the history boards that the museum project, and there's reference in the policy to town project donations. Those historical boards are not a town project per se. They're a museum project on our town lands. So, but that portion of the policy would cover that and not allow sponsorships?
It applies because it is outside of the museum and it's
Yeah.
long-term. And so in that case, anything that the museum, the aquarium, or artsy does that's on public land, public facing, whether if it's long-term or if it's a title, then it would need to come to council to be considered.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions for this? Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. You did comment on the section with respect to council approval in answer to the chair's question. And it states under council approval, any sponsorship involving a title sponsor. And the definition of title sponsor is naming rights to a property, event, or program. As an example, then, you noted that the Sydney Summer Market could be referenced as the Sydney Summer Market sponsored by XYZ. That seems to be an event that would fall under the requirement for council approval, does it not?
The reason why it doesn't fall under something like a parade, which can happen one time, and it would be the one time a year exception. So things like the Summer Sounds concert and the market, because they happen repeatedly, they're not a once a year event, those do, they aren't exempt from those restrictions. They would fall under this policy. And so when it comes to the concert series, it's on the legacy list, so they have an agreement in place with Peninsula Co-op, and we wouldn't challenge that. But if they were to get a new title sponsor, then that would need to come to council. And similarly, so the market falls within that, and they would need to come to us if they were going to change the name of the market to recognize.
If they were
the
going to change
sponsor.
the name, and you're saying the front end of the name, but not the sponsored by on the post end of the name.
Well, I would say either way, it's not changing the name. It's not a matter of, it's possible you could say Sydney Street Market business, you know, it would need to have the wording brought to you by, you know, sponsored by, something along that lines. That would be it wouldn't be a title sponsorship when you have that wording.
It would not be, okay.
No, that's a presenting sponsorship.
I see. There is a definition here, presenting sponsorship. So with the language brought to you by or presented by, it would fall into that definition. Okay, was the SBIA consulted at all? I know they do they help coordinate a number of sort of one-day events. throughout the town. Were they,
When I
Have they
looked
reviewed
at
this?
that, well, I was considering Treat Street, but then Peninsula Celebrations leads Treat Street, so I think we could see a sponsor for that one day. But no, I haven't involved the BIA in an early review of the policy, and I would be interested in their feedback, along with Artsies. I didn't speak to everyone who could have had a perspective on this.
Thank you. So the recommendation is that the policy as presented be approved, which will then go to council as early as the next council meeting. Has there been any contemplation for a further period of either consultation or looking for feedback from those groups that you haven't been able to reach out to as of yet?
I certainly could. I mean, that could be done before the next council meeting. It doesn't take too long, to get that further input.
Okay. Thank you.
It sounded like you were about to move the recommendation? No? All right. Will anyone move the recommendation? Mayor McNeil-Smith.
I will in just a moment, just seeking clarification from Councillor Rintoul through you, Chair. So a consideration would be that while this, if this motion passes, the motion passes this evening, it would go to council meeting next Monday. Council does have the prerogative to go ahead and approve a motion this evening to go to a future council meeting, and it could be the council meeting after the one next week, to provide time for staff to do additional engagement with the organization. Were those along the lines you were thinking, Councillor Rintoul?
If I may, through the chair, yeah, I guess I'm just concerned there may be some unintended consequences here, and I'd like to see the opportunity for some engagement with those organizations that certainly have been mentioned by staff as part of this, but others that I think we've thought of through this discussion that may look at this through a lens that certainly I'm not having been an event organizer of this nature. So yeah, if someone were to move that there be a delayed period for that further consultation, I would be more comfortable with that than the motion that's here as recommended. Thank you.
Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take some guidance for staff if my wording on the fly isn't clear or understood. And that is that that policy AD022 sponsorships be referred to the council meeting following next week's council meeting. I'm sorry, I don't have the date at my fingertips, but so it would be 3 weeks hence. And I'm just gonna have that as the motion, and then in my motivation I'll speak to the rationale for that wording.
I second that motion.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Is there any motivation, Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Yeah, I think first I want to comment and thank staff for the work that's been done on this. I think it's a measured approach. I think the consultation with a number of our community organizations who host many different types of events and things that can have sponsorship has been helpful in committee considering it, and I think generally I'm in favor of it. I'm supportive of it, but I think that with the opportunity of a couple more weeks, that staff could reach out to perhaps the BIA, perhaps the Arts Council, perhaps Beacon Community Services, just because of the Scholl Center and some of the things that they do. And just that they have an opportunity to give it some thought for a few days and maybe get back to us with any, or back to staff with any input, and that staff could bring that input back to us at that council meeting 3 weeks hence, and I think we'd be certainly comfortable taking a decision then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Duck, did you have anything to add?
No, I concur with the mayor's comments, and I think based on the conversations we've had and the discussion tonight, it's worthy of going back to those organizations, and I think a couple of extra weeks will allow staff to follow up with those consultations and get clarity. And I think that'll be well received. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I'd propose an amendment or an add-on, so that it's to refer to whatever meeting. And then I would just add, after consulting with SBIA, Artsy, and Shoal Center, just to give staff that additional direction in terms of that's what the expectation is.
Is there a seconder for that amendment? Hearing none, the amendment fails.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, thank you. And I wouldn't support that because I don't want to limit it to those organizations. I do want you to talk to the Marion Spirit Center. I want
Right.
input from a variety of organizations. And I'm assuming that, you know, in keeping with the recommendation, or excuse me, the motion that's on the floor, the intent is that any written correspondence that would be received would be forwarded to council for consideration when this comes back. And I'm going to support the motion on the basis that that is the understanding, that a staff report will come back to include that feedback, written feedback that they've received. Thank you.
Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Chair. I will support the motion, and I would have supported the motion that was actually a recommendation that was put on the agenda for tonight. I was more than comfortable with it, but I want to be respectful of the fact that there are members of council that are, I would prefer they be in their comfort level. So if the information they needed, I'm all for it. So thank you.
I'll just say that I'm quite happy with the wording of this. I think it will capture 99+% of scenarios that are presented, and will bring to council those which should come before council to be approved. And even though the wording, as Mr. Humble suggested, was maybe a little bit open and perhaps not as tight as some people might wish, I think that's what council is for. I think council is the ultimate filter in this process, and it's hard to specify all eventualities in this type of a document. So I'm quite happy with the way it looks. I'm happy with the way the motion's on the table. I'm not concerned with the time factor, and I think it's a good idea to allow community representatives to have a look at this and come back to council if they have any concerns. So I'm in favor of it as the motion stands now. Any other questions or discussion on this? We'll call the question. All in favor?
I'm voting in favor.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Is there any other business that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call for adjournment.
Motion to go in camera or no?
No, we have another meeting for that. Mayor McNeil Smith.
Second.
Second, Councillor Garnett, all in favor. We stand adjourned. Do you want to change chairs, or do you want to run from there?
Sorry, the camera's off.
No, it's still on because we have to do special and then we go to
Okay. I'll call our special council meeting to order at 6:45 PM. I want to thank Councillor Novick, Chair of our previous Committee of the Whole meeting, for giving the territorial acknowledgement this evening. I would look for a mover and seconder if that our agenda be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. And I'll turn to Councillor Garnett for a motion to go in camera.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters regarding a personnel matter pursuant to section 90.1A of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
We have it moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed?
In favor?
The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And a motion to adjourn. A mover and a seconder.
Move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
In favor?
None are opposed. The motion carries. We are adjourned.